Hey everybody, it's Wendy. Welcome. Today we are going to do a fun watercolor card and I'm going to try to explain light source to you. If you've never done any painting, coloring, anything like that, it's kind of a new concept for you probably. But if you watch other Stampin' Up! Demonstrators or card videos, you probably have learned something about this before. We're going to use this Little Piggy stamp set and that other stamp set, the name's escaping me right now, for our sentiment. So this is definitely one of my top 10 favorite stamp sets. I have to expand now to top 10 because the more I play with different stamp sets, the more of them that move up into my favorites. And so this stamp set was definitely on my top of my priority list. I am kind of a country girl, farm girl. And so I love anything farm, like pigs, cows, chickens, stuff like that. So this is sped up pretty quick because I do a lot of masking and stamping here, and it took a long time. So I sped the video up, and you can see here I used my basic black archival ink to ink up that pig, but first I used Post-it note tape and masked off the sentiment because I didn't want the sentiment stamped. Now, some people just cut off sentiments on stamp sets. They use scissors and actually physically cut the sentiment off. I didn't want to do that on this because I wasn't sure I wanted the sentiment off there. I just knew I didn't want it stamped on for this card. I had already pre-stamped and cut a mask for this Little Piggy, and I use Post-it note tape to do all my masking pretty much. Sometimes I use Simon Says stamp masking sheets, but mostly I use Post-it note tape because it's really handy. I'll link to it over on my blog. It'll be linked underneath all the Stampin' Up! Supplies. So again, I'm masking off my bottom sentiment here and just stamping the little pig. I kind of wanted to create a scene with all the pigs except the flying one. He didn't make it into this card, excuse me. So you can see there now it looks like that little pig is behind the pig in the front. So the trick to masking like this is to stamp whatever you want in the front first. So whatever you want to look like it's in the front is what you stamp first, and then you proceed from there. Again, I'm going to mask off the sentiment on this little pig and stamp again. And the reason I'm using my Misty tool for all this stamping is simply because I'm using Arch's cold press, it's cold press watercolor paper, and it's very toothy, which means it's got a lot of texture to it. So a lot of times when you're using a watercolor paper that has kind of a lot of texture or tooth, you want to use some sort of stamp positioner because a lot of times you won't get a clean stamp the first time. Same reason I'm using the Misty here in order to stamp my sentiment at the bottom. I will link to my Misty stamping tool also over on my blog under my Stampin' Up! Products. This product was created by a friend of a friend, and she invented it, and it's a really, really awesome tool. And it's helped me a lot with my crafting, so I highly recommend purchasing one. Okay, so I'm going to use the powder pink Stampin' Up! Ink here, and I'm going to squeeze it into the palette, what I call the palette. I love the design of Stampin' Up! Ink pads because of this. They are very friendly for like watercoloring and doing other projects. Okay, now we're going to talk about light source. And I have sped this video up to 4 times its regular speed. So please don't be fooled that it took me quite a while to actually paint this. In fact, the card from start to finish took a total of 45 minutes. Part of that is because I'm so novice, and I really take my time and I kind of sit and look at things and go back and do more. And so that's part of the reason. So I'm using Sweet Sugar Plum on their noses because I wanted their noses and their cheekies to be a little bit darker. And then I'm letting their bodies dry and going back in and adding another layer of pigment. So here's the thing. This is why I use arches, is because I'm not very good at watercoloring, and arches watercolor paper can take a lot of water and still look nice. And I have found that the cheaper the watercolor paper is, the less quality you're going to get out of your watercoloring. So if you really want to have nice watercoloring and help yourself out, I would recommend buying more expensive, nice watercolor paper. Arches is kind of middle of the road. It's not super cheap, but it's not super expensive. And because we're card makers, we only use a little square. So you can get like 4 cards out of one sheet. So I'll link to that also over on my blog. I get it on Amazon. Okay, so I told you we would talk about light source. So I'm pretending that my sunlight is coming from kind of like the right hand side and coming down on these pigs. So you can see where I've left it much lighter on their backs, on some parts of their ears, and I've darkened it on one side of their bodies. Now, I probably should have gone in and gone even darker, but one of the biggest mistakes that people make, new watercolor people make, I think, is not making things dark enough out of fear that you're going to ruin your project. And that's exactly what I did here. I was afraid that if I kept going or even used a darker color on those pigs, that I would ruin the whole thing. And after I'd put so much effort into the stamping and all this stuff, I just wouldn't do it. And so I am curious to know what would have happened had I gone darker on the one pig's back and belly, stuff like that. So for the ground, I had used crumb cake and soft suede, and you can just see where I darkened the areas underneath the pigs specifically. Now I'm using Tempting Turquoise, one of my favorite colors. I like pretty much all bright colors is what it boils down to. And I'm starting out with a lot of pigment on my brush at the beginning, and then I keep moving that brush out and letting the water dilute the pigment. So I'm starting out heavy pigment at the bottom and then letting it dilute as I go up. You understand here? So again, here's more heavy pigment, and then I let it just kind of dilute as I go up by not adding more pigment to it, and then you get this really cool look where it's kind of like dark at the bottom and the top looks more like the sky. And yeah, so I just love how it turned out. I love how this whole card turned out. Used Daffodil Delight and Emerald Envy for that little flower there that the pig's holding. And I went in with some Tangerine Tango and darkened the circle inside the flower. Now we're going to do the card base. So I did some stamping inside the card base, and I almost made the same mistake that I made the first time I made this card, because I generally make a card before I do a video on a card so that I know it's going to come together. So the first time I made this, I stamped this first and then stamped the other sentiment second. And I realized that that was stupid to not do it that way. And then here I go starting to do it the exact same way again instead of the other way, which I'll show you because I did catch myself. So I think I ended up actually inking up this stamp and then realizing, oh, yeah, see, I do. I ink it up and then I'm like, oh, wait, no, Wendy, no, don't do it. Oh, don't do it. See? So what you have to do is get this little piggy do here onto an acrylic block, which I'm spacing on doing. It's because I messed up on video and I was like, oh God, now what? Oh, blah, 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 blah. So first I ended up doing my masking before I put them on acrylic block, which I would not recommend doing. That was foolish. So I get them put on a block here. And then I'm going to mask off the pig and the 3 little dots that go after the sentiment, this little piggy. Because on the inside, I want it to say, says, comma, this little piggy, period. So when I go to pull my masking paper off, my stamp comes off. I'm so annoyed at this point. I'm like, are you serious? Really? Is this really happening? So I ended up pushing them down and it worked fine, and I just kept my fingers out of the sentiment. So I found that if I stamped this first, this little piggy first, it was easier to stamp the says on top. Because there's a sentiment in this stamp set that says, says thanks. So the way this is supposed to work is you have the little piggy that says this little piggy, and then you open the card up and it says thanks. So this is just a great way to stretch your stamp sets. Instead of it saying that, it says this little piggy, because the front of this card says happy birthday. And that is the most times that I've ever said says in less than 1 minute, I believe. So the front will say happy birthday. The inside will say says this little piggy, which I thought was really cute. Okay, I have a piece of powder pink cardstock, and it's cut at 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. No, yes, 3/8. And so I'm going to layer this down on my piece of very vanilla thick cardstock. My first card that I created, I used Whisper White thick cardstock, and I actually ended up liking that better. So that's what's linked over on my supply list, but you could use whatever you want. All right, for the final touch on this after it's dried is I took a pigment pen, and I just traced over some of the areas that I felt like did not stamp real clear, like the flower especially had some little white spots showing through in the black lines, and that bugs the bejesus out of me. I could not stand it. And then like his little arms, this pig for whatever reason just didn't stamp as clean as the other ones. So I'm just kind of going in and going over some of those lines. I didn't go over all of them. You could certainly trace all your black lines. Kelly, what is her last name? Latavola. Her name was escaping me. Kelly Latavola traces over all of her black lines every time she makes a card. I think she's crazy. Her stuff's beautiful though, so I guess she could do whatever she wants. So I'm using Scotch foam tape here to pop this up because it is a watercolor piece and it has a natural tendency to want to bow or bend. And so dimensionals just don't cut it in this case. So I have to cover the entire back with foam adhesive. And that is also linked over on my blog. I get it at Amazon. It comes in a big roll and it lasts me quite a while because I don't use it on every card. So that is my card. The only thing that I did after the video was done filming is I added a little bit of glossy stuff to their noses, and I went back through and dotted all of their eyes with some black marker just to make them kind of stand out even more. Okay, if you want to see other videos from me, you can click on either image of the images you see here. All of the supplies are listed over on my blog or in the video description down below this video. If you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, click on the little circle that has my face in it. Give me a thumbs up, comment on my video. I'll see you on Wednesday. Bye-bye.